Hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode we have an interview with the photo director Owen Gale of House and Garden magazine. We talk about the role of picture editor in today's editorial world. Owen kindly runs us through the advice for photographers, the do's and don'ts of approaching publications, and how we learn by mistakes and how maintaining a growth mindset can lead to a sustained career. So sit back, enjoy. So Greg, you have known Gale, sorry, that's a good start, isn't it? When you listen to the interview, you'll understand why I've just said that. Let me just start again. Okay, right. So, Greg, you've known Owen a long time, right? You've actually worked with him for quite a few years.
I have. So, for full disclosure, we have worked together for a number of years in his capacity as photo director at House and Garden. I can't remember when Owen first got me in on a job, or why. But yeah, anyway, we have done so for a number of years, so that does come up, and it's a little bit embarrassing for me because it feels like a teacher talking about you.
I remember Greg; he was a very good pupil.
But it's an absolute cracker, this one, for anyone who's kind of interested in learning more about the editorial process, about the kind of the structure of magazines and the role of the picture editor and the photo director. Owen's done a really wonderful interview, a really candid chat, which is full of really good advice, I think, personally. It's the type of thing that I wish I'd had available to me when I was kind of first approaching magazines.
Same. I think there's a lot of things to look out for, and Owen very kindly addresses them. So it's I think what's also nice is you can hear Owen's passion for photography and how he wants to look after photographers, and talks about nurturing relationships and things like that. And it's really nice. I think in a world where we feel as photographers that people are constantly down on us or can constantly kind of almost anti-photographer, that there are people like Owen. I'm personally, I've not worked with Owen, but I have worked with other, photo editors and commissioners who do share that level of passion. And it's really nice to hear it come across.
Yeah, I think being able to get constructive feedback from somebody that is commissioning you is so important, and unfortunately is so often overlooked. And largely that isn't due to a lack of willing. I think that's just due to people not necessarily always having the time to do it. And maybe it was something that was, when back in the day when you would go into a magazine and deliver your images yourself or go to the lab, you would get that kind of feedback in person. And nowadays you might be sat on the other side of the world just emailing your edit over, so you're less likely to get it. But yeah, I think that Owen's chat really highlights that can be so beneficial. If you can make that a part of your relationship with a commissioner, then you can really reap great benefits from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually go for lunches with all my commissioners. I try and take everyone who commissions me out for lunch. It's fun. I love a lunch.
Well, you get a discount at Subway these days.
No, I was yeah, right. It's KFC. No, I was just going to say that's why I am the size I am. So I'm forever eating out.
Well, let's without further ado, let's crack on and let the listeners listen. I hope you enjoy it, guys.
Let the listeners listen.
So on today's episode, we are very lucky to be joined by Mr. Owen Gale, photo director at House and Garden magazine, which is one of the Condé Nast titles. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about the role of the picture editor, photo director, all the different titles that it has within the industry, and hopefully shed a little bit of light on the inner workings of a picture editor's mind. Owen, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Could you perhaps start by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about how you've kind of ended up where you are, and your journey and what that entails?
That's a very scary story to start with. I've been at House and Garden now for 13 years. I was a picture editor, or assistant picture editor rather, on Grand Designs magazine, another interiors magazine before that. And then before that, I ran a picture library, helped create a picture library, was a photographer, and before that was an assistant for almost 10 years. And then going back even further was at University of Falmouth. So I'm kind of getting to the stage now where I'm starting to see it full circle, having done so many of the roles within the industry that I think, you can, find a vocation in. So yeah, that's my story so far, and I'm sticking to it.
That is quite a multifaceted set of skills that you've kind of managed to accumulate.
It's all the same. I mean, there are things that I guess skill sets that you learn with each specific role, but essentially the same things kind of channel through it. I'd love to say that I have, I knew that I wanted to do this from year dot. That I mean, my dad was a very keen photographer, and gave me a camera when I was 5, which I shot 35 pictures of my mates on a 36 roll of film, and then shot one picture up the Cutty Sark mast. He asked me to take one picture without any people in it, and that was the shot I did, and I actually managed to get it pretty much square, which anyone who works in interiors knows how important getting everything square is, or architecture. So and I think that may have had some bearing on my life, but he was very proud of me and printed it up in his darkroom, and and I think since that moment and all of my childhood of being absorbing so much from him, it did kind of lead me down that path. But I'm not the sort of person who makes great strides to be, this is what I'm going to do and that's how I'm going to do it. I've been really lucky, and I've fallen into pretty much everything that's happened to me. But it's kind of part of being a photographer. You have to be a little bit lucky, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so
yeah. Is it fair to say that you've had like a since that early days, and you've had a lifelong love of photography and all the aspects around it?
It's always been there. That and music, I sort of divide my time between those two things. And my dad was the same, so I really am a chip off the old block. But
I do have to interrupt you here and say, for our listeners at home that can't see you right now, you are sat in what looks like a space station. You're surrounded
it's very impressive. It's very impressive.
Mixing decks, keyboards, stuff that I wouldn't even begin to know how to operate.
Yeah, part of my other skill set is working with music. So, but that's much more of a hobby than a vocation. But yeah, no, certainly photography is 50% of me, straight down the middle. And I think had Dad chosen something else, sadly he had an accident. He only had one leg, so he could never play football with me. So it was always going to be something else, and that was what he was into. So and now being a father myself, I know, it's really interesting watching your children learn the things that you know and teaching them. But anyway, it's always been there. But I lost it for a long time, and then at 16, I got really lucky, I suppose. One of the first times I got lucky. I got unlucky, and then I got lucky. I walked into the A-level photography class at Harlow College, and asked to speak to the course leader, and he told me in no uncertain terms to get the F out in front of a class full of my peers. And very interestingly, a lovely gentleman called Craig Fordham, who is a fantastic fashion photographer and a good friend of mine, ran after me. Who he'd just started that week teaching. He just qualified from Bournemouth, and he said, "Come on back," and sort of cajoled me and sort of said, "Look, let's have a look at what you got," and took me under his wing and actually managed to somehow get me a place at Falmouth. I don't really know how he did it, but he did it. And and that's just one story in so many, where I've just been really, really lucky and just met the next person who's opened a door for me. And photography is kind of like that. It's full of people that are like you guys doing this. It's full of people that are actually willing to support other people. When I first started this job, I always thought that you invite loads of photographers to a party and they would stand in all the corners of the room and never speak to each other. It'll always be, at House and Garden, we have a almost annual contributors drinks party. And, I always thought at the beginning that would be all of them waiting for their turn with me. And come over, say hello, thank you for the year, and then goodbye. But actually, it's not like that, and it's something we've built that I'm really proud of. House and Garden, that the photographers feel like they're part of a family in some respects, but part of a bigger thing. That we see them all on equal terms, and I really like that.
That's a really nice touch. Really nice touch.
Yeah, for some of our listeners who are perhaps a bit kind of, I don't know, maybe starting out in their journey in their career, I think the idea, obviously, editorial is a market which is changing, so they might not necessarily have too much of a clear idea of what a picture editor actually does, what your job kind of entails. So obviously, you touched on it there in the sense of having that network, but can you go a bit more into that and explain a little bit more?
Yeah, it changes. I mean, again, I've been really lucky. I've worked on 2 magazines, or 3 magazines, sorry, and so not that many. I'm not one of these photography people that's moved around from spot to spot and picked up loads of skills from one and some from another. I've learned a lot within the roles that I've been given, but from Grand Designs and For Homes magazine to House and Garden was a drastic shift, and I was much more in charge of working spontaneously, or I was forced to work more spontaneously at Grand Designs because we were always working on the next issue. And with House and Garden, it's much more of a longer arc. We shoot a lot of stuff in the summer and in the spring, summer, and autumn, and really then bed down for the winter and wait for the brighter days to come again. And it's much it's a very different process. But I mean, to give you the nuts and bolts of what I do at the moment, and this will be different for every picture editor. You have a different hierarchy in your magazine as well. I have a direct line manager, my art director, and she and I work really closely together, and I couldn't do my job without her. I really enjoy having that feedback. It's a really helpful thing to have. So there's that to be mindful of, and every magazine is different. Some of them, the picture editors don't commission the photography at all. They don't really have a say in who's going to choose the photographers. The art director or the creative director will do that, and they see that as their role. And I'm just again really lucky that that my art director Jenny Lister is there every step of the way, and we decide those things together, because and we've got I hope a really good track record now of doing it all right, but that I have a sense, I do have a certain amount of autonomy over what I do. So I am there to pretty much commission the photography for the magazine, but I only look after certain aspects of it. So I'm mainly involved in commissioning the photographers for the house shoots and the lifestyle shoots and the portrait shoots, and any major features. And I don't, unlike other magazines, have an assistant. I work on my own, and I think that's another thing that changes magazine to magazine. Like, I certainly know one of the other titles within the group, they have someone that looks after all the commissioning and someone that looks after picture research and additional images for commissioned features, and the nuts and bolts, the single pages in a magazine, and I do pretty much all of that as well. So it's quite a full-on job.
Yeah, it sounds it. It sounds it.
Yeah, that's the simple stuff, and then there is all of the other stuff. So looking after, the photographic budgets, there is looking after rights issues, there's looking after, the I suppose the freaky amount of spreadsheets that we have, which scares me
Oh,
on a daily basis. But updating all of those things, making sure that everything is where people need, where people can find it.
so when you are looking to either bring photographers on or choose a particular photographer for a commission, what is your kind of what's your thought process? And is there do you like it when people approach you? Do you approach people that you've kind of searched and found, or and your little black book? How often do you kind of refresh it, or do you kind of take a look at it and go, well, actually, that guy's moved on, or maybe give this guy a go and things like that? What's the process?
I mean, we've got a very, very good little family of people that we work with at House and Garden, and as I say, I've been there 13 years, so I'm I'm pretty um I'm pretty keen to keep everyone going, and we occasionally bring someone in. Jen is much more hot than I am about getting like fresh people's names in the magazine. I'm much more, produce better work from the people that you've got. But it's not just about the whole thing of you're only as good as your last job. I don't believe in that. I think you nurture people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you make the photographers that you have already got a very good relationship with better.
Mm.
That's part of your job. You're essentially a bit of a. I've said this to Greg before many times, but you're a bit of a bridge, as a bit of conduit as a photographer. You're feeding information, as a photographic editor rather. You're feeding information from the photographer back to the people at the magazine, and you're also, feeding information from the magazine to them and trying to put it into a language that they understand. And if something fails on a shoot, it isn't their fault. It's everyone. Right, it's a bit of a cliche, but everyone does rise and fall together. I think you make it as good as possible beforehand, and you take the time doing that, and then and really make them better. But I'm digressing. But going back to your initial point, I think we we approach people based on who we know, that who's gonna bring something out of this that we wouldn't expect, who's going to bring something out of this that we would expect.
Mm-hmm.
It depends really. It's a case by case basis. It's very subject specific.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we're shooting a portrait, we can be a little bit more. I would never probably, when I started, have pegged Greg as a photographer that would work for us. But looking at, and one thing I always feel bad about whenever I commission him is I feel like, well, he's not going Mach 2 in a fighter jet, so he's probably not going to find this very interesting. But that's the amazing thing about him, is that and I really admire this in photographers, is the ones who are really prepared to get their hands dirty, and and that's where I think it kind of goes both ways, because I hope that because I'm helping them enough, they will help me in return. So I can't obviously give everyone a Ferrari to photograph. Sometimes I have to give them a Morris Minor,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about them having the fleet of foot, quick mind, whatever you want to call it, to be able to work with that and show their skills as a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really where you earn your spurs, because the ones who can produce when the situation in front of them is not giving them everything, are the ones with the most the most attributes, as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's interesting, actually, your point there, because ultimately, in the strength comes from the relationship and the feedback, and that's not always something that you find with who you're lucky enough to find with clients is a client who is in a position to and is willing to and has the time and is willing to make the time to actually give constructive feedback, which helps elevate both of your positions and your roles and the way that you approach the work. And I know from previous experience of having worked with you is that's something that I really appreciate, and you don't always get elsewhere. I don't know. I mean, Tom, you will have had that, I'm sure, with certain picture editors that you work with. But it's probably more rare than it is common, I think, in the industry. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. I think people are so busy that the ability to do that actually becomes quite restricted.
The luxury.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. And normally when it happens, it's because we're out having lunch or something like that. It's not something you ring up and just say, you got 5 minutes, because no one's got 5 minutes. But if you can, make time to have lunch and stuff, then is the time you normally get it. But they're quite rare. So
I think lunches are great. Don't get me wrong. It's a nice time for you to be away from your desk, and also you're in a neutral space. So the photographer doesn't feel like he's got to, he can really tell you what's going on. And I would really, I really want that. I really want that feedback, and I really want to understand what they're going through on our shoots. Shooting interiors is such a, I've been shooting in and around interiors since 1996 when I graduated from Falmouth, and I was never destined to be an interiors person. But luckily, Craig, that same photographer, introduced me after me bugging him for ages to be his assistant. Introduced me to an amazing interiors photographer called Ray Main, and I think that whole relationship. I completely lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys.
it was good. I was enthralled.
I was going to tell you a story about how I met Ray, but then I've realised that's really not what you're asking me. Oh dear,
we enjoy the stories. The stories are good.
No, well, I'll tell you that story, and you can edit it as you wish. But yeah, I mean, I think I then went and met Ray, and Ray started me on a road with interiors, and was very specific about the way that he wanted to do things. I mean, we were working on 5.4 and with an RB mainly, but also shooting a lot of Polaroids, and it was a very different and thorough training that I had then. So I think, trying with someone, I mean, I hate to use you as an example, Greg, but you're right in front of me, so I'm going to use you as an example. But with someone like, with someone like Greg, where, he's predominantly, we saw him initially as a portrait guy. He's now, I think, blossoming a little bit on the interiors, and he hates it, but he's kind of gaining another skill, like something that might down the road. I mean, I'm not saying it's always going to be what we'll get him to do for us, but he works for House and Garden. It's always going to be part of the remit for us. But he's broadening his skill set with every time he has to do something, and I think one of the most amazing things is when we learn to do something difficult. When we find something really, really difficult, it changes our DNA a little bit, and we get into an uncomfortable situation that we're not happy with. And photography, when you're starting out, is a lot of uncomfortable situations. It's a lot of like, oh God, I don't know how to call that person. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know how to email them. What can I do to get noticed? And all of those things are really uncomfortable, but they are the things that will make you better. And that's what Ray always taught me. It's the he's the guy that came up with the Morris Minor and the Ferrari principle, which is simply that, you can take pictures of a Ferrari and make it look beautiful because it's a Ferrari. Not everyone likes Ferraris, but but the principle is that you take pictures of a not so beautiful car and make that look beautiful. Now you're starting to learn your craft. And when I left college, I wanted to be a conceptual photographer. I wanted to go and I was going to make photo books, and I was going to be the next Jan Dibbits or the next I was kind of thinking about becoming the next Andy Goldsworthy at one point, but I met Ray, and Ray just beat all that out of me. And what he then also taught me was the business, how to talk to people, just mimicking him, and how to talk to people on the phone, and how to be with your clients. I mean, I've never met you, Tom, before today, but I instantly get that feeling from you the moment you talk to me.
Stop it!
You guys. But
well, that's very kind.
That is something that I think people, when they're younger and they're less experienced, they should just understand that by living a little bit and by getting things wrong and all of those cliches, you'll actually, you'll grow a little bit each time. Put yourself into those difficult scenarios, whether you're young or old, even perhaps more important when you're old, because, my other fear is photographers getting stuck in their ways and not really wanting to move their work on.
Become too comfortable.
Yeah. And I've faced a really lots of difficult decisions when I first got to House and Garden about the people that were working there, and there were lots of photographers I inherited and I managed to keep for a few years, but I felt there were some that really didn't really want to do it anymore, or didn't really want it enough, and there were so many people that really did want it enough. They made that choice, the choice for Jen and myself, a lot easier, but it was still very difficult. It's hard saying, or choosing people over other people. I lose sleep over it all the time. Don't think I don't.
Yeah, there's that real thing with photography, though, that there's almost like you need to maintain that kind of childlike way of looking at the world in that childlike wonder to be able to maintain the excitement. Because ultimately, if you want to be creative and thinking creatively, you need to be going in and seeing something in a almost with fresh eyes, don't you? And I guess at some point, some people in their career get to a point where they stop seeing the world like that, and they can't therefore then get the motivation to actually deliver something above and beyond.
I think people have paths that they've traveled many times, and it's very easy to choose those the path of least resistance. It's a great it's a great expression, because that resistance training is what actually makes us better. It's like deferred gratification, like the bit that you do today that really hurts, the run you go for, it's always going to feed back into what you do tomorrow and the next day. And I think photography and photographers who are successful seem to be able to find new ways of looking at things. Not every day, but they are aware when they have become, they've plateaued and they need to do something differently. And I love all the ones that really, they tell me their stories and I learn from that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I feel in a weird way, not quite to that extent, but I've felt that with lockdown is I've been able to come out of my work almost, take a massive great look at what I was doing and realizing that I maybe hadn't been pushing myself in maybe the quite right direction, but also not as pushing myself as hard as I'd wanted to be kind of working. Not that I was being distracted or anything, but I think when you can come back, and I think a lot of the old guys never really take a step back and look at their work and things. But for me, it's been fantastic. Obviously, lockdown's not been ideal, but it has been nice to kind of have that realization.
Yeah, I mean, you've either reappraised your work or you've reappraised your garden.
I've done both.
It's basically what most of the photographers that I know have been doing. They've either been completely redoing their garden or their house,
Yeah.
or the ones who are lucky enough to live with a model. Now they are, they're earning the big bucks right now. They're off the scale, in work at the moment. Whereas the rest of them, sadly, are still not back at it. It's a very interesting time.
That's so on that kind of vein. Then this is interesting. You're talking about the kind of people perhaps getting to a point where they lose a little bit of motivation and they become a bit stagnant. Are there any other common mistakes that you see photographers making, and more specifically inexperienced kind of photographers making? Is there anything that you would say is your do's and don'ts from a picture editor's point of view?
How
I mean,
long
it's
have we
good to.
got?
Wow.
It's okay though. It's not like I sit back in my ivory tower and just chuckle manically to myself. You've gone way too wide angle on that, and you're right. Whilst the camera's on the floor. No, I try to respond to every email. I really try. In fact, in recent years, I've definitely not been as good as I was when I started, and that's one thing that that's my resistance training. When I go back, I've said to myself, I need to start nurturing some of the new photographers that have contacted me. I think one of the main mistakes. I mean, there are lots of technical mistakes in interiors that people make. Not thinking about the height of the camera is a big one for me. Shooting everything really wide angles so it barrels, and it just looks awful. And not thinking about the placement of furniture. My greatest piece of advice to any aspiring interiors photographer is put the camera down, get it at the right height, and that I'm not going to tell you what the right height is. You have to work it out for yourself, all right? And you'll get it, but then let the bones of the room. You can't change the architecture. You can't change the walls. You can't move those, but you can move all of the things within it. So find the shot that works well with the architecture, and then start moving the furniture. And again, don't be scared of when you change angle to do another cross shot to tweak the furniture again. Obviously you need some continuity, but those things are really important. Not having furniture too close is another thing for me. But I think there are so many things that I get presented with from photographers, from their approach. They might send in an email thinking the best thing to do is tell a joke, or try and be really crazy, or try and catch my attention by sending me a picture of a naked girl, or or they are.
Glad you got my email.
Yeah, Tom. I know I never replied. It's part of my resistance training, so you're on my list. No, I think one of the things that I'm always amazed about, and one of the things I learned very early on, was trying to do my homework. Like, to pick up a copy. You want to get into House and Garden, read it. Pick it up, look at the pictures, read it sideways like we all do. Like, oh, who shot that? look that photographer up. Ring that photographer up. Say, I really love what you do. I wonder if I could come and help you. They all say no 9 times out of 10. But then there'll be one who'll kind of go, oh, God, yes, I need an assistant. Are you free on so-and-so? And that'll be it. Again, another cliche about this profession, but I honestly, think that the best way to learn is from people who've done it, and they will tell you their story. They may not be the only voice you need to listen to, but I really think you do learn. You absorb a lot from that experience and being in the situations where you haven't got the pressure where you haven't got to make those decisions, that you'll watch someone else make them and fall or rise based on what they decide.
Mhm.
But not doing your homework when before you contact a picture editor is kind of is a little bit crazy, because some people they're sports photographers, and they email me asking for work, and I'm kind of a bit like, well, last time I looked, I didn't have that much in the way of surf photography. No offense, Greg. Um, in the magazine. So, which bit were you really keen to be? Which part of the magazine, and that's one of the questions I tend to ask people. Which bit of the magazine did you see yourself in? And that was
Sorry,
a
Greg's just ridden off on his Harley.
but yeah, I'm constantly surprised that people don't pay more or give that more of their time, and actually make it, slow down with everything, slow down with, okay, what do I want to say? Yeah, Greg, did you not get the memo about it being a really quiet environment and then switching your phone to
That's the alarm on the Harley, isn't it?
have I got to
We
do
could
everything around
cut
here?
that.
Yeah.
Might leave it in. I'm the guy who cuts it.
Yeah.
It is an interesting one though, Evan. I think photographers. I'm guilty of it. I'm sure Greg at some point has done it. We've all done it because we see that our technical skills can be applied anywhere. We just assume that we can shoot it, whereas actually that's not the case with a lot of things. And I do think there's kind of a lot of people who'll just reach out and go, well, yeah, I do sports stuff, but obviously I can shoot interiors.
Yeah, but they don't. The moments that you browse an email or click on a link, and it's funny. One of the photographers that works for me now, it was ironic the way that he kind of came about, because it was actually his agency sending me something like that.
Right.
They sent a mail shot, and it was nothing to do with house and garden style photography. And I just looked and I was like, why have they even, I'm going to look at, I clicked on the link just to look them up and see what they were all about. And I thought, oh, they're a US agency, and they weren't, they were British. And then by default, I clicked on the next name, and it was a gentleman that now has worked for me for 5 or 6 years. And so it was kind of, fortuitous in some respects that they had sent that link, but there was no thought about that. They didn't pick the right person to back the right horse, so to speak, to send it to House and Garden, and that's an agent. So I understand that the photographers are probably, I guess they've got a lot to think about when they're approaching someone, but that would be my first piece of advice, and main one is that have a look me up, look this podcast up, listen to me
definitely look this podcast up.
listen to me ramble on about nonsense for an hour, and then perhaps curtail whatever you were going to send to me to fit. But I think like when people come and see us and they've got that far, I mean, we're pretty quiet about, when we get people in, it's most likely we're going to use them. It's pretty, once you get to that stage, we do a lot of, I'll look, or the team will all look. We have a really great art team. I'm really lucky to work with them all, and they're a lot of fun to work with. But like, they all have a really vested opinion about the photographers as well, and it's something that I've really learnt to trust. And they've proved they proved themselves right so many times about things where I've been a bit unsure. They have been right about something. So it's a committee thing, but like, when we get people in, they're fairly sure that they're going to work for us, unless they turn up and they haven't really edited their work. And I think that's one of the greatest, it's kind of, it's a real art, editing your work, I think, and trying to be, walk a mile in my shoes, work out what I'm going to like. And I think that all goes back to looking at the magazine, because that's where I make my judgment calls, and in that's the stamp, that's the final part of the journey for that picture. It's come out in the magazine, it's in print, and we're looking at the repro, and we're either successful. I think we're always successful, but like if there are certain things that we didn't quite get right, then I'm feeding that back up to my teacher element of my personality is feeding it back to the wizard element at the front of the chain, thinking about who we could work with that would be better in that scenario, or how we could get that person to do something differently next time. So I think looking at that final product is a great first step for anyone who's trying to get a foot in the door anywhere. Why wouldn't you? It's the first thing you do.
Well, you'd think that. I don't think a lot of people do, though. I think a lot of people have a copy and paste email that they just fire out to whoever. They just type in picture editor, publication name, and fire out a generic. You probably received emails in the past that don't even have your name in.
A lot of them are addressed to Gale.
Gale.
Fabulous thing having a surname that's a first name, especially if you're American. Americans, they love to call me Gale. So what I generally
might start doing that.
You can do that, Greg. You can do that. I'll let you do that if you want. You can call me anything you like. Just make sure you get the picture in focus.
Okay, Gale, darling. Wonderful.
Yeah, it does always strike me. The amount of emails that I'm obviously not as well known as yourself, but for me, I get emails, and the most frustrating one is when I get an email and it's in a different color, and they say, "Dear Tom," or Tom. I've had a couple addressed to me THOM. I mean, I don't know many Toms who spell it like that. But they that's in black text, and then everything below is in purple, where they've just copied and pasted it. And you go, well, I'm not going to. I do actually. I'm the same as you. I do reply to absolutely every email I get from people who want to assist or people who want advice. And you might look into this. There's an app called Text Expander. It will save you billions of hours by pre-deleting and pre-writing lovely snippets so that you can then personalize. It's good. For anyone who's listening, textexpander.com, probably.
Tom's
this podcast brought to you by Text Expander. But yeah, it's frustrating that I think a lot of people just don't do their homework. But it's almost a waste of just everyone's time, because you're not going to pick them.
Yeah, I think it's something that's just a good rule of thumb. Start with that one. Let's not think about all the people that do it wrong. Let's think about the people that haven't thought about it yet and that might do it right. And I hope that people in the world that is insanely fast now just spend a bit of time with things. And actually, a magazine is actually something to spend a bit of time with. And I think this is a skill that we're losing. And I think it's really important that that people do take time, because your profession, like, especially photography, if you want to get my ear, then I think I was always brought up that if email's a wonderful thing, like, don't get me wrong, but I was saying to Greg today, I said, I think it's time that someone should revisit email and think about what works and what doesn't, because it's incredibly frustrating as much as it's helpful and it's part of our day-to-day life. I was brought up ringing people up, and that's one of the things I love doing, more than anything, is talking to people on the phone. It's like you get so much more accomplished. And I'm much keener to spend time on the phone. One of the things that I really love is when I tell a photographer that I don't think they're going to be a fit for house and garden, and then they spectacularly prove me wrong in the next, supplement I pick up on a Saturday and Sunday, and they do something so spellbinding that I am forced to then backtrack and go, you know what I said? I was absolutely wrong. I really think you could actually do something for us. And that's happened a few times. And, in the time that I've been doing this, and, it's really good. It's really kind of grounding and I'm digressing again. I'm sorry, but like,
no, carry on.
Going out and shooting again. Like
Mm.
that's the one. Like I'm now taking a lot of pictures for our website and shooting a lot of houses again. And you know, one of the things it's great to walk a mile in photographer's shoes again, and I really appreciate what they do for you. And you know, it's not for us to. You know, I say, you know, when I get the copy of the magazine, I sit back and I don't think, well, we've done an amazing job there, you know, well, backslapping and whatnot. I think a lot of that love and that kind of that pride is in the photographers and the things that they've achieved, and that we've hopefully, you know, paid them well enough for, paid them on time for, you know, given them the support that they need to create those things, and the feeling of happiness and belonging, that they can go out and they can feel confident when they work for us. And I think, you know, I hope I'm sure other photo editors get that as well, but I think a lot of them are so busy that those margins for actually feeling like that get less and less and less with each. You know, I certainly know from my colleagues at Condé Nast that with, you know, the world changing the way it is, that they are getting more and more squeezed, you know, in terms of the bandwidth that they have time for that. And I really want to make sure we hold on to that as long as we can at House and Garden, because it works for us. That slow, you know, that slow editorial, the thoughtful process, you know, it really works for World of Interiors as well. And I love the fact that they are so keen to stick to their tradition of producing things slowly, working with film, and working with their look, and not trying to move with the times, producing their thing. And that's what I think we do at House and Garden. I think we are a more commercial magazine, perhaps a commercially minded magazine, perhaps, than them. But I think we managed to sort of evolve, and we haven't really had a massive change in the way it looks in a number of years. But I think it's definitely feels, you know, modern, but traditional at the same time. Oh God, that sounded terrible. It sounded awful. God, don't
No.
please put that in.
Well, I'd like to kind of follow that up, though. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about, just to go back a little bit. It's interesting what you're saying about kind of walking a mile in a photographer's shoes. I mean, at the beginning of my career in photography, I interned at the Sunday Times under Monica Allende and Sunday Times Magazine, and I did that partly because I wanted to see what went on behind, you know, those kind of the walls at Wapping, as they were then. And yeah, it was a fascinating way to get an insight into that and to learn. And I think it's super important. And that's partly what this podcast is really about, is trying to kind of produce an element of transparency, which I feel sometimes isn't there in the photographic industry, because the more that we understand each other's roles, the more that we can actually work to service those needs. And everyone basically benefits from that. But yet, because it's such a funny industry in the way that it's very closed off and kind of the walled garden in so many ways, it becomes difficult to penetrate what your role is compared to my role, and how I can do my job better that would make your life easier, etc., etc. Which is partly why we have somebody like yourself on today. But moving on from that, I'd be super keen to know, you know, you were talking about the way that House and Garden have maintained the way that they've done things. I mean, obviously the industry is changing and editorial market is shrinking, and it has been for a while. At the same time, there are probably more magazines on the shelves than there ever have been in some ways. You know, they are smaller magazines, smaller independent magazines. Where do you see the kind of editorial industry going, and the role, I guess, of, because the role of the picture editor is super important in editorial magazines, and I think it still should be super important in wherever it goes next. But do you have any insight on what direction that is? I mean, obviously, lots of stuff is moving online, but Do you feel like we're really using that to its full extent, to its full capacity?
What, using online to its full extent?
Yeah. It feels to me like a few years ago there was a whole movement to kind of get magazines on iPads, and that was kind of like what everyone wanted to do, and then it never really worked that well. Like there were some that looked amazing, but how many people do you see
really,
doing engagement?
we're really lucky. Again, me saying that I'm really lucky, but I think we as a magazine are very lucky that we have a fiercely loyal readership, for starters, that that love getting the magazine. And so with, I think, global ad revenues dropping slowly, incrementally, we've kind of not really had to worry so much about that. We've done pretty much all right. I think we've been lucky, whereas a lot of other magazines perhaps haven't, and so it's a difficult one for me to answer. I mean, we've also got an incredibly successful website. The big drive, I suppose, for all titles is to try and balance things up to get back to where revenues were perhaps 15-20 years ago. And I think I don't know if that's achievable with the online model, but I always think that there is going to be some need for house and garden, and also some need for picture editors. I think the job is going to change, but all jobs change. Photographers are going to have to change in the next 40 years, but I honestly believe that the printed form, I'm a massive record collector, and I've watched records go through the fearful period that they did when Steve Jobs had that bright idea, and then all of a sudden, here I am in 2020 buying more music on vinyl than I buy on MP3, and I'm absorbing and consuming music in the way that I did when I was a much younger man, but in sense of having the physical. I like the fact that we produce a magazine that is very high quality, super high quality. So when people pick it up, they know they've got something that's really worth the money that they've spent on it. In the same way that I look at, one of a gatefold 180 gram vinyl album, I'm willing to spend much more on that because it's a physical thing that I'm going to keep, and people do keep house and gardens for a very, very long time. And it's, and for some people, it's really important to them to take the time to read the magazine, and they absorb it, I think, in a different way than they absorb the website. It's like what I was saying about long form articles. I think that the internet is becoming so phone flicky, for want of a better expression, but
you
you're not.
Need to work on that expression.
Yeah, I know.
Phone flicky. Not sure it's going to catch on, but
well,
I see what you said.
You say that, Greg. You say that, but all I'll say is Google. All right. All right.
Touche.
All right. But I think because as I said, I'm shooting a lot of things for the website, and for me, it's heartbreaking when they say, "I don't worry about it being high res, because everyone's just going to read it on their phone." And then you just think about people just scrolling up and paging through your pictures like that, and not dwelling on them like they do a beautiful DPS in the magazine. You have, there's two things, and they serve two different markets, and that's an instant dopamine fix, isn't it? For everyone who wants a little bit of interiors in their life, they can go onto the website and they can flick. And I think this week we hit 1 million Instagram followers, or something like that. I think either that, or I think we've got several trillion Facebook followers now. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think also us being a very established and old magazine, we're going to be 75 very soon, and I think that counts for a lot of people, and I think it means a lot. It means a lot to me. And one of the things that when I first got to the magazine, I loved was how important it was to the people that worked for it. It was everything. It was kind of like Manchester United was to Alex Ferguson. No one is bigger than the club, and that's the way that it was sort of, that knowledge was given to me like that, and I've always held it very dearly. That we've been given this thing to look after, and we look after it. We must, until the next person comes along to look after it. And I
think
hope
that's a really important point. It's that sense of, in a world full of saturated with so much information and so much kind of opinion, people are actually crying out to get their opinions and their facts and their news stories and whatever it might be from sources that they trust. And actually, the for want of a better term, the heritage brands, the brands that have been around for a while, that have delivered that for a while, that have the history of delivering that, shouldn't be trying to pander too much to become, big on all these new platforms. Obviously, they need to have a presence there, but they need to maintain a level of integrity. And I guess that's what you're talking about to some extent, of what House and Garden have managed to do, and a lot of other Condé Nast titles have managed to do, is maintain a level of integrity.
When I first had my very first picture meeting with Sue Crew, who was the editor at the magazine for almost a quarter of a century, she looked me very sternly in the eye and said, "We shoot the best of their type." All right. Now that may not mean much to anyone else, but whatever it is the best.
Mm-hmm.
If it be a house and a particular style of house, it's the best type of that particular style. It's the best example of that particular style.
Mm-hmm.
And that was literally my education, my House and Garden education, that we produce this thing that it is going to be like that, because we have decided that's the right path to take, because we have all of the history behind us to rely on, to give us those building blocks of knowledge that we need to make that decision. And I think I'm incredibly proud of what little blocks we've built in the 13 years that I certainly, the art team that I'm with now, and my lovely art director, we've done that together. She joined about 2 months before me, and I was her very first appointment. She's regretted it every day of her life ever since. But yeah, we've made some really good things, and I think we will continue to do that thing, as to the best of our ability, and we'll do the website in exactly the same way. It's like our DNA. It's printed everywhere, and even though we might have a different voice for our website, it's a slightly, it is a different approach. It still comes from people who are on the magazine, so they know all of that, and they know all of that history, and they present it in a way that they think is going to work very well for the people who desire things in shorter form and desire things quickly and need those dopamine hits. So I think that, well, it's already proven to be a massive success. I mean, it's I guess whatever the magazine world changes into, or becomes in the next 40 years, every approach from House and Garden will follow that path. It will be the best of its type. And I don't know whether I'll be there to do it, but I hope I will. So yeah, it'd be nice if I could carry on for a few more years.
Well, that's that's a lovely place to leave it. Before we totally sign off, we have 2 standard questions that we tend to kind of ask our guests, Owen. It's the bit that we snicked from Desert Island Discs.
Okay. The bit I've actually dreaded this bit. So
have you?
Yeah,
it's very difficult for me to answer this one.
Good. Well, I like to see you sweat. So, yeah, obviously, favorite photo book, or your Desert Island photo book. Let's not say favorite.
Yeah.
And your Desert Island camera. Which ones would you take with you?
Well, there is the photo book is the difficult question.
Mm.
Simply because I've had one book since I was at Falmouth College of Art, which I fell in love with when I was there. I never followed that style of photography, but yeah, I really loved his work because he was the kind of the cooler version of Martin Parr. Because Martin Parr came to lecture at Falmouth when I was there, and I wanted him to be this really fascinating photographer, and it was probably one of the most boring lectures I've ever been in, and that's no disrespect to him at all, but like it just didn't float my boat when I was I was a younger, probably much more juvenile man. But the one book that was around then that did have something interesting and edgy for me was Nick Waplington's Living Room. um, I I loved that book so much, and have loved it for so long. But as I've grown older, another book has kind of taken over, and that's Vivian Meyer's book. So
Yes. Is
I
this the
just
one
think
that came
that's
out?
it's the one that was. I mean,
The So I
it's
think
got.
there's been more than one now, hasn't there?
I think so. It
Probably.
was the first book that comes out, and the name of it escapes me, but I know the cover. I've got it downstairs.
It is utterly beautiful, that book. It really is. It's You look at those images and there's just everything that makes you fall in love with film and nostalgia and Americana and observation and street photography and just oh
Now, am I right in thinking that Vivian Meyers, she died penniless, and no
Yeah,
one really knew about her photographic talent until her
yeah.
archive was discovered? Right.
That's right.
yeah.
So so the book I love, I've just looked it up. So, but it's Vivian Meyer, Street Photographer, and I think the thing I loved about it was that it reminded me. It was kind of like a well. Firstly, the photography was just tight, like just it captured a moment in time, which I think photography in its essence is that it's being able
Mm,
to transport you to a place.
Hmm.
And that from the incredible work that's gone on in motion pictures, and we've all been transported there by them. But to show the reality
Mm.
that she did, I always really loved Diane Arbus's work, and then that book came out, and then I found out the story behind it, and I was just utterly moved by the fact that she had no want to make something of those pictures. They were just for her, and for her, the process was everything.
Mm.
Going out and fulfilling her creative process, and it resonated a lot with me because of my dad,
Mm.
and because of the way that he approached photography, and the way that he never really sought out any recognition for his work. And I think if he was alive today, he'd probably, I hope he'd be pretty proud of me of all of the things that I've done. But
Mm.
I think that's why that book particularly, got me going, and
Mm.
I think that's the one I always return to. If I pick a book off the shelf, that'll be the one. Camera, that's a dead cert. I had a Mamiya 6.
Oh.
Yeah, with a really beautiful 50mm lens on it. I think it's a 50mm. Yeah. What can I say? It's just, I had it for about 3 years, and I don't think it let me take a bad picture. It was
mm,
one of those ones where I didn't use it enough because it was square format, but I always loved square format because you never had to worry about landscape or portrait. You just
Mm.
you found, and especially when I'd been taught at Falmouth a lot about the visual language, and the 7 major points of it, and the one that really stuck with me was space, the last aspect of the visual language, and
Hmm.
negative space, and that lens just lent to shooting people quite small in the frame, so you crop them off at waist height and then get a lot of like peripheral vision. And I I really just loved that. I think, that aesthetic is just always going to do it for me. So yeah, I did a lot of lovely portraits of people in Jaywick, in rural Essex, or in coastal Essex rather. One of the most beaten up towns in the country, but there was some amazing people there, and portraits kind of similar to Arbus, and actually getting to know some of the people up there was quite it was a good time in my life. So I always have fond memories of that camera, and shooting black and white film, and really enjoying that process, enjoying in the same way that perhaps Vivian Meyer did.
Lovely.
Excellent. And they'll all be perfect for Instagram because they're square. Sorry, I always have to kind of finish on a clip.
Yeah, you always have to ruin it at the end, Greg. Nice one.
Greg.
I was welling up there, and
do you know what's funny? If you would like, also, I'm sure you're already aware of his work, but you like that Americana real stuff. There's the photographer Ouija, who is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, he's the run and gun guy with the flash gun.
That's the guy. And do you know the story about him?
I don't, but tell me.
Well, so Ouija. So for the listeners, Ouija is like one of my all-time favorites. He has an amazing book called "Murder Is My Business." If you're, not au fait with
murder.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. He's an interesting guy, right? So that time, that period, so the Vivian Myers Ouija kind of era, he basically lost all his money in a game of craps, I think it was, with the guys, with all the other newspaper photographers.
We've all been there. We've
all been there. We always get together for our game of craps and shooting craps in the alley. And he then lost all his money, lost his pay packet, and then moved into the room where the ticker tape was, because obviously news used to come into the newspaper on a ticker tape. And so that is how he got the nickname Ouija, because he'd be asleep, the ticker would go off, he would then, all the other newspapers, the photographers are waiting till the morning to pick the ticker up, and then they'd go. But he would always turn up on the crime scenes before the police, because he would always get the ticker first, because it would wake him up.
Wow.
And that is how he got the name Ouija, after the Ouija board, because then no one quite understood how he would turn up all these murders.
That's excellent. Well done.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
I've always loved it. Always loved that story.
Well, I've always loved, I think photographers are an incredible breed of men and women. Yeah. And I think, I like to be able to cite myself as one, although I'm not as good as, all the people that I thankfully employ. I think one of the things I really like about them is they kind of like us, a little bit of danger. They're like, they're a little bit of, just doing things, that perhaps being a little bit of a maverick about things. I really like that. I think it's a endearing quality. Should all keep that.
We do love danger.
Yes, you do.
Well, Owen, listen. Yeah, it's been fascinating to hear from you, and I hope. I know that there'll be some brilliant bits of information and knowledge there that hopefully people will find of use. Following,
you don't get too many emails to Gale.
Yes.
Well, I'll know who's listened to this podcast, won't I?
That's it, right? That's it.
I'll just blame you two. And
that's the challenge, folks.
I think as I say, I'm happy to be called Gale, as long as you don't mind me calling you your surname in return. So,
touche.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine.
Well, it's been fantastic having you on. Really appreciate you giving us your evening and spending so much time with us.
Oh no, thank you for having me along. It's been fun.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks for listening. If you'd like to check out more episodes, you could head along to our website, which is exposednegative.com. You can find us on Twitter at exposednegative and on Instagram at xnegative. That's exnegative. And you can also follow us both along personally. Tom is on Instagram. He's at tombarnes.com, and I am at Greg Fennell. Thanks for listening, guys. See you next week.